He is risen indeed, and it is a privilege to be able to speak to you today. Every time there's an opportunity to preach, is always a privilege. It's definitely gets me a little bit nervous, but especially on Easter, when we celebrate the resurrection, the very purpose of why we are even here, why we call ourselves Christians, it makes it even that much more special. And yesterday we had the opportunity, and we'll hear about this a little bit later on, but we had the opportunity to pray over the city. We had a gathering downtown. We called it the Jesus Walk. And I wanted to share just a little brief thing that I was going to share there. But, Pittsburgh today is a pretty beautiful city. And it has really experienced a lot of transformation over the last several decades. It wasn't that long ago, and maybe even during the lifetime of some people that are sitting in this room today. But Pittsburgh was a city that was very dirty, very polluted, very smoky. So polluted, in fact, that one of the two of the nicknames that were given to the city it was called the Smoky City, which we definitely don't view that as a definition of Pittsburgh today. Or actually, another name was Hell with the Lid Blown Off. It was so smoky and so there's so much. It was so dark here that sometimes at 10 o'clock in the morning, the street lights were still on in downtown Pittsburgh because it was just so dark. People needed street lights to see where they were going. Interestingly enough, some people that lived in Pittsburgh at the time actually thought that the smoke was actually a good thing. First of all, smoke symbolized the fact that there was progress in work, which is true. Other people thought that maybe the smoke was helpful to their lungs, which is completely the exact opposite. And some farmers actually thought that the smoke was beneficial in some way to their crops, which was also not true. And actually, Pittsburgh, in many ways, experienced people in certain cities, especially in some of the lower lying areas, not just lower economically, but physically low areas. Smoke would settle there and it would sit there. So even on windy days, the smoke would just sit in those areas. And children had really high rates of asthma. Cancers were really high. And so people were struggling and suffering. And then when Pittsburgh started to really revitalize itself, some of the steel mills left. Point Park, actually, the very point, the triangle, once had multiple highways going right over top. There were factories and buildings right on Point Park. It wasn't the green space that we see today. You can still see remnants of some of the pillars that held up some of those bridges. Believe it or not, Pittsburgh used to have even more bridges. You can still see them if you look out on either side of where the two rivers come together. But even today, almost 70 years after this revitalization started, even today, the American Lung Association still rates Pittsburgh's air quality with an F. Right? We still fail. For my Russian students, it would be a number one, and a Norka, right? It's the lowest grade you could possibly get. Pittsburgh gets an F, a failing grade in terms of air quality, even today. A lot of the small molecules that you can't see are actually still, pretty harmful. And I think we rank in the top 20 of the worst cities in America in terms of air quality. Now, I don't think any of us are going to move, hopefully, as a result of that. But that's just a reality of the city that we live in. And one of the things that I wanted to share yesterday is that Pittsburgh has gone through a revitalization. And the green spaces, the clean air that we see, the cleaner air, let's put it that way, that we see in Pittsburgh, didn't happen automatically. It took a lot of time. It took a lot of effort. What happens in our hearts is kind of similar. We are also people that, if we look at our past, are people that have been overwhelmed with sin. Hell living in our hearts. We had evil thoughts, and our actions were evil. But it was only because of what we're celebrating today we were transformed. And even though Pittsburgh 70 years later, 80 years later, is still transforming itself and still can't get it right, still failing on the American Lung Association's scale of healthy cities, they're still failing. You and I today were transformed by the love of Christ. And what goes on in our hearts today is not a failure. It's a continual process of renewal. And so I like, living in Pittsburgh, we see a real life transformation, in our city, but we see a real transformation in our heart. And so, that brings me to the most iconic and the most well-known maybe moment in history. And it was the death of a man. Interestingly, that when we think about what that moment in history looked like, it was maybe it captured the most deepest, most painful suffering a human being has ever endured. It was the point of death of a person. And it captivated the world. When you think about other iconic moments in the world, they're usually ones of triumph, ones where somebody is victorious, somebody wins, somebody crossing a finish line, a flag being raised, some kind of victory won. The moment that we celebrate is the exact opposite. It's the point of death. It's a moment that artists have tried to paint their visions of it across many, many thousands of years. Musicians and poets have written about it and sung about it. Numerous lyrics have tried to describe the pain and the suffering of that man's moment on that cross. Preachers and speakers speak about it nonstop. People even make jewelry out of it. It hangs on buildings, and they put it on clothing. Some people even tattoo it on their bodies. And it's interesting that this iconic moment is a moment that is so celebrated. In today's world, our news media is not allowed to show, a dead body on TV. They censor those kinds of images. And yet, for some reason, that moment 2,000 years ago is forever captured, and people are riveted by it. Maybe the most reproduced image. If we would have had a photograph, it would have been the most reproduced image probably of any image ever existed. And yet, for some reason, people are just fascinated by the point of death of a man on a cross. And I guess the question is, why are we so fascinated by it? What is it that this world cannot stop looking at that image, cannot forget about that image, cannot put it out of their minds? What is it about that image that has captivated every person in this world? Whether they're a believer or not, people know what that image represents. People who maybe aren't even believers have seen the image, acknowledge its significance, and even today, when you think about a public execution, that cross does not symbolize death for people. That cross symbolizes life, and I guess the question is this. What makes this point so different? Why is this moment in time so different? And did Jesus want this moment to be remembered? Have we made it into something that it shouldn't be? In Matthew chapter 16, if we can turn to Matthew chapter 16, I want to read a verse in verse 21. So Matthew chapter 16, verse 21. It says, "From that time, Jesus began to show his disciples that he must go to Jerusalem, and that he must suffer many things from the elders and the chief priests and the scribes, and be killed, and on that third day be raised up." Notice that Jesus seemed to be intentional about it. He said, I am going to Jerusalem, I am going to be arrested, I am going to be killed, but I am going to raise up. So Jesus made it a point to emphasize this to his disciples. I want to go back to another passage. Jesus, as he is having his last meal with his disciples, in a matter of hours, he was going to be arrested, and they wouldn't be able to see him free, or they thought for the rest of his life. Jesus gives them wine, and he says, gives them bread, and he says, "This is my body. Whenever you eat of it, do this in remembrance of me." He gave them wine. He says, "Drink this, and every time you drink it, Drink it in remembrance of me, symbolizing that his body was going to be ripped into pieces. His blood was going to be spilled. So yes, he's told them, remember that point when my body is going to be beaten up. Remember that point when my body is going to be spilled. I need you to remember it. If we turn to another passage, Luke chapter 24. Luke chapter 24, also very similarly, starting in verse 46. Luke 24, verse 46. And he said to them, and this is right before he goes up, and he's speaking to his disciples. He says, and he said to them, thus it is written, that the Christ should suffer on the third day, rise from the dead, and that repentance and forgiveness should be proclaimed in his name to all nations, beginning in Jerusalem. Jesus knew that his disciples saw the death on the cross. And one of the last things he gets to tell his disciples is, I need you to go and tell the world, starting in the city where we're standing, in Jerusalem. I need you to start there, but I need you to take what happened on that cross. I need you to take it to every single nation in the world. I need everybody to know about what happened. That I took your sins and I nailed them to that cross, and that I arose, and that I am in heaven now, but your sins are now forgiven. He said, proclaim that message. Proclaim that image. And so that image, that iconic image of a man on a cross, dying the most brutal death anyone could have ever imagined. And crucifixion, why crucifixion? It was the most horrible thing that the Romans could have imagined. After being beaten and abused, you nail somebody to a cross and you just let them suffer in public view of everybody. Even today, public executions are done with humanity, right? There's certain pain, like certain ways that medicine is, or the drugs are administered in order to take away and alleviate the person who's being executed their pain, so they don't suffer at the point of death. And yet, the iconic image of Jesus on that cross is something that was purposely done to make it painful, to make it humiliating, to make a public spectacle, the spectacle of that particular situation. And today's a celebration. Today's a celebration of what Jesus did on that cross. The fact that he did it for us and we don't have to do it ever again. He did it once and for all, and that today we can live in that power. And we can live in that forgiveness. We can live in that, in the glory that he experienced and that he took for us. We can live in that, and we can accept it as our own. And over the past month, I've had, one topic as I was trying to think about how, what to speak about. I knew I was going to be preaching on Easter, and one topic just kept, coming up, and it's this idea of serving. And I wanted to look at Jesus as a servant. And it seems a little bit strange, because you would think that, on a day like today, to talk about Jesus being a servant seems like it's not appropriate, right? Because a servant in our mind is somebody who is lowly. So a servant is one that doesn't deserve to be talked about, right? Wealthy people don't invite people over to their house and say, hey, I just want to spend the next 2 hours just talking about my servant and what a great job this young man or young woman is doing. People don't do that, right? Servants are people that are in the shadows, that are unseen, that are underappreciated, probably underpaid or not paid at all. And yet I want to talk about Jesus as a servant, and just the idea of what is our role and as believers, using Christ as an example. What's our role? How can we serve like Christ served? And I wanted to kind of go through a couple passages here just to kind of pull out some interesting ideas and examples of how Jesus served and how we can apply that into our lives. We often look at very easy ways of doing things, right? We look at shortcuts. We look at ways that are beneficial to me. And one of the things that I was thinking about over these past couple weeks is, when was the last time I've done something that I got zero benefit from? When did I ever go out of my way and help somebody or do something for someone that benefited me zero, and maybe even hurt me in the process? And it's, these examples are few and far between. More often than not, and not to say that we don't do that, or I've never done that, but more often than not, we look for opportunities that if I don't get something out of a particular interaction, then I don't do it. I avoid it. Let somebody else do it, right? What's in it for me? Oh, nothing. Then I'm not going to go there. I don't want to do it. I don't want to touch it. I don't want to talk to those people. If I can't get something, if this can't be a transaction of some kind, I help you, you help me, then what typically happens is I step away, right? This is not worth my time. When we look at Jesus' ministry was all about service. Everything he did was about service. Much of it was done to people that did not care for him, or they were trying to use him, which is interesting, right? Let me give you two examples. In Matthew chapter 12, we read a passage where, and there's a couple of these passages, but I'll take you to a couple here. Matthew chapter 12, verse 39. Matthew chapter 12, verse 39. Actually, I'll start in verse 38. Matthew 12, verse 38. Some of the scribes and the Pharisees answered him, saying, "Teacher, we wish to see a sign from you." Right? Interesting. Scribes and Pharisees were not typically on the same side. They disagreed about some theological principles. But they come to Jesus and they say, "Jesus, together, we want to see you do a sign." But Jesus answered them, verse 39, "An evil and adulterous generation seeks for a sign, but no sign will be given to you except for the sign of Jonah." Right? And he was talking about the fact that Jonah was dead for 3 days and remained alive. They came to Jesus, and there's a similar passage in Matthew chapter 16, just a couple chapters later. Very similar passage, chapter 16, starting in verse 1. This time it's the scribes and the Sadducees, 16:1, Matthew 16:1. They came to test him, asking him to show them a sign from heaven. So here's an example where people are following Jesus, listening to what Jesus is talking about, for no other reason than to see if they could test him, if they could trick him, if they could catch him saying something that they could twist and use against him, right? Because he was constantly, putting things in front of them that they couldn't answer, or he was challenging them on certain ideas that they couldn't understand. And so that's one group of people that Jesus was serving. He was teaching them. Yes, he knew they were in the crowd, but Jesus kept faithfully teaching. Another group of people, if we turn to the Gospel of John, and this is probably the vast majority of people, Gospel of John, chapter 6, verse 26. Let me go to verse 25. John chapter 6, verse 25. And this is right before, this is right after Jesus had fed them. All right, he had fed the 5,000 at the beginning of the chapter. And it says that on the next day, the crowd remained, but Jesus went on the other side. Okay, Jesus separated himself from the crowd. Verse 25. And they found him on the other side of the sea. So imagine, Jesus feeds 5,000 people, and then Jesus disappears. These 5,000, I can just imagine like ants. If you've ever like messed up with an ant pile, right? And all of a sudden these ants just start coming out, right? They all scatter. And they all kind of scatter, and they show up on the other side of the lake. And they find Jesus. And they say, "Rabbi, when did you come here?" And Jesus said, "Truly I say to you, you are seeking me, not because you saw signs, but because you ate your fill of loaves. Why are you looking for me? You're looking for me because I fed you for free." Interesting. How often do we serve because we get something out of it? Right? Here are people who are following Jesus, not because of how good Jesus was, not because of, the teaching, because, man, I just can't get enough of what Jesus is teaching. No. They wanted food. And Jesus gave them free food. And I'm sure that was the best bread they had ever eaten. And so they scatter looking for this man because we just ate the best bread ever. Let's go find him again. And they scatter and they look until they find him again. Jesus is like, you found me not because of any other reason, not because I've shown you anything spiritually or physically. It's because you ate and your bellies are full. And you keep looking, you keep following me because you think I'm going to feed you over and over and over again. And I'm sure Jesus could. But do we see Jesus shutting down his ministry? Did Jesus just say, "You know what, I'm done. These people over here are trying to trick me. These people over here are just begging for a free loaf of bread. I'm done. I'm tired. I'm trying to get away from you guys, and all you guys do is chase me down and just ask me tough questions, trying to stick sticks in my wheel spokes, trying to trip me up, trying to get food out of me. I'm done. Jesus doesn't do that. Jesus continues to faithfully teach, continues to faithfully fulfill his mission. What's interesting, he kept going, and he kept going, and he kept going. And there's actually a prophecy in Isaiah that talks about the fact that the Messiah is going to come, and he will make the mute speak. He will give eyesight to the blind. He will raise the lame, and they will walk. Jesus understood, this is my mission. It doesn't matter if it comes with baggage. It doesn't matter if there are times when it becomes difficult, if there are people that are trying to undercut me or trying to get something out of me. My mission, the Father sent me for a mission, and my mission is to do those things that were written about me, to fulfill every single word that the Father spoke about me ahead of time. Isaiah was written 800 years before Christ ever stepped foot. And Christ was on this earth fulfilling every single word, even though his ministry came with baggage, people that were asking for things, people that were trying to trick him, but Jesus never stopped. Jesus kept serving, faithfully fulfilling everything that he had been called to do. And what's interesting, and this is Isaiah chapter 35, Isaiah 35 verses 5 and 6. Isaiah 35 verses 5 and 6. It says, "Then the eyes of the blind will be opened, and the ears of the deaf unstopped. Then will the lame leap like deer, and the mute tongue shout out for joy, and water will gush forth in the wilderness and streams in the desert." Isaiah 35, 5 and 6. Water in the desert is life. Jesus said, "I am here to bring life." And everything that he did, he uplifted people. He healed. He spoke. He regenerated people's lives. He gave them new hope. Why is it that people would see him and they would cry out? Right? Why is it that people kept following him, even though maybe it was for the wrong reasons, but they kept following him because no matter where he went, there was life. There was joy. He gave them hope. He gave them a reason to keep on living. And when we look at Jesus as a servant and we think about how can I apply this into my life, let's think about when we go somewhere, what kind of a feeling do we bring? Do we bring, like it says here in verse 6, water will gush forth in the wilderness and in the streams in the desert? Are we the kind of people that when we go into a place, when we serve, does it seem like life begins to be restored in that place? Or when we show up, we shut things down? And I think sometimes, we serve like that, right? We come in and we look around, this isn't good for anything, we shut it down. We should be the kind of people. If we follow Christ's examples, we should be bringing and encouraging life. We see somebody that's in ministry, we encourage. We see somebody who's struggling or maybe not finding their place in society or in the community of the church, we give them a purpose. We give them hope. We give them joy. We encourage people. Right? That was what Christ was all about. No matter where he went, he was like water in the desert, bringing forth life, encouraging people to do things that maybe they otherwise would not do. Now, in all of this, Jesus had these 12 disciples that followed him at every moment. And they had to have seen what Jesus was doing, right? Discipleship in that point of time was no matter where Jesus went, his disciples were with him. They were like little tails. Jesus very rarely in Scripture, and I think every time that Jesus found a way to be alone, the Bible made it very clear. Jesus separated himself, right? Over there to pray or over there, but his disciples, why couldn't they connect the dots between what Jesus was doing and how he was doing it? Now, it could have been their age. There's some people who think that the disciples were fairly young. A lot of times they're drawn with big beards and things like that. Most likely that was not the case. Most likely the disciples were on the younger side. Probably at the oldest, they were probably in their early 20s. Some people think they were maybe even teenagers, high schoolers, something along those lines. That was the typical age of when a disciple latched on to a rabbi. It could have been their age. It could have been their lack of education. Some of these disciples obviously were not, or a lot of them were not educated people. So it could have been that. It could have been a steep learning curve for them. But we see their immaturity. In Luke chapter 22, we have a very interesting, and this is written in several Gospels here, but in Luke chapter 22, we have this interesting discussion that rises up amongst his disciples. Who is the greatest? Right? Who is the greatest? I see my boys having these discussions a lot, right? Who's the strongest? Who's got the biggest muscles? Who can run the fastest? Some of the first conversations that I hear between cousins is, are you the fastest in your class? And, have you done this, this, and this? Do you think I can beat all the kids in your class? Or, whatever. There's this constant competition. And the disciples were no different. They got into this dispute. And if we look at verse 24, this is Luke chapter 22, verse 24. And a dispute also arose among them as to which of them would be regarded as the greatest. Okay? Now, in Mark chapter 10, we have a similar, I'm not going to turn there necessarily, but a similar passage, a parallel passage, because we have two different gospels. They talk about it from a slightly different perspective. It says that two disciples, James and John, asked if they could sit on either side of Jesus. All right? And now, how do I piece these two together, right? So I think that James and John came up to Jesus and said, Jesus, we would like to sit on either side of you. And the other 10 disciples overheard that, and they're like, whoa, hold on a second. Why do you two think you get to sit on either side? I think I'm better than you. The other guy, no, I think I'm better than you. And this starts, all 12 of them all of a sudden are arguing, I'm better, no, I'm better, and this is why, and this is why. And you have this huge, because in Luke 22, it says that a dispute arose among them, all of them. All 12 disciples are standing in a circle, Jesus in the middle, arguing, I get to stand on the left, I get to stand on the right, you don't, because you this and this, right? So this very immature, very childish discussion goes on. But I say childish, and I started thinking, I was like, I think we do the same thing. My ministry is better than yours. I do more for the church than you do, right? This person sings better than me, or I sing better than them. I should be up there. They should be down here. Look at all the things that I get to do that I never get recognized about, or, whatever it is, right? We elevate ourselves. How easy we elevate ourselves when we're supposed to be serving. How quickly we elevate ourselves to try to stand on the shoulders of somebody else. Right? That this person should be down here. Meanwhile, I should pull myself up a little higher. Right? I deserve to be up here. And so as immature as this discussion is, I think in 2022, that discussion still happens amongst Jesus' disciples. You and I have similar discussions. When we serve, my ministry is better. My ministry is greater. I do better. I do more. And we try to elevate ourselves over top of the other. But Jesus gives them a secret to what it means to be a true servant. Look at what he says. This is Luke 22 and verse 25. He says to them, the king of the Gentiles, Luke 22 verse 25, the kings of the Gentiles exercise lordship over them, and those in authority over them are called benefactors. But not so with you. Rather, let the greatest among you become the youngest, and the leader as the one who serves. For who is the greater, the one who reclines at the table or the one who serves? Is it not the one who reclines at the table? But notice that Jesus is going to twist something, because when you compare how the world defines what it means to be great, and this is the perspective of the disciples, to be great means you have to accomplish, you have to be on top, you have to be the most visible, you have to be the one that gets the most respect and the honor, wear the biggest crown, you have to be the one that everybody serves. But look at what Jesus says at the very end. He twists it. But I am the one. So I am among you as the one who serves. But I am among you as the one who serves. Jesus, the Son of God, looks at his disciples and says, a true leader, if you want to be a leader, a true leader is the one who actually is doing the serving. You want to be like me? Look at what I'm doing. I, the Son of God, am among you. And what am I doing? What have I been doing this entire time? I've been serving. I've been pouring myself out. I've been giving. I've been helping. And notice that a lot of the things that Jesus did, he got nothing in return. When do you remember somebody paying him? When do you remember somebody, on even rare occasions, remember the 10 lepers? One came back to tell him thank you. And even then, that one was emphasized with such detail that he was a Samaritan. He came back and said thank you, right? So much emphasis is put on the one person who said thank you because it never happened in Jesus' ministry. He served and he gave and he worked and nobody thanked him. No, if people just followed him, we want more food. They followed him, we want to try to trick you. We want to try to test you. We want to try to see if you can slip up. And Jesus said, you want to be a true leader? The Son of God is serving you. I am among you who serves. A true leader, Jesus says, is the one who serves. Even his disciples didn't even fully understand, even though he just spelled it out to them. Do you remember shortly after the resurrection, 2 disciples were on the way to Emmaus? And we can turn there. This is Luke, it's a couple chapters ahead. Luke 24, verse 21. Luke 24, verse 21. 2 disciples were on the road to Emmaus, and they were very disappointed. They had waited for 3 days because they remembered that Jesus had said, after 3 days, I'm going to come back. 3 days came and went, and Jesus wasn't back. And so they left. They left Jerusalem, and they were on their way out of the city. They were heading to the next city over, Emmaus. And look at their conversation, verse 21. But we had hoped that he was the one to redeem Israel. Yes, and besides all of this, it is now the 3rd day since these things have happened. But we had hoped that he would be the one that would redeem us. A redeemer for them was a king on a horse, was a general with an army, one that was going to be conquering. They thought Jesus was the one. But they failed to remember that Jesus said, that's not the guy I'm going to be. I am among you as the one who serves. Jesus says that's the worldly definition of greatness. And that's the one you think I'm going to be. I'm not there. I'm not going to be that one. When I'm here, I'm the one who serves. They should have been looking at the bottom. Who was the most servant of all servants at the time of his time on earth? And that was Jesus. He was constantly on the level of people that nobody else wanted to interact with, that nobody else wanted to touch. It was the sinners. It was the people that were living a lifestyle that would not be welcome in our church. It was the beggars. It was the lepers, people that were shunned in society, and Jesus was among them. Jesus attracted the tax collector to himself. He attracted failed, rabbinic students, right? People that by default became fishermen. People that were rejects in society, the uneducated, the poor. He's the one who attracted them. If they really had listened to what Jesus told them in Luke 22, I am the one who serves. The leader is supposed to be among you, is the one who serves. They would have remembered, we shouldn't be looking for the general. We should be looking at who's the biggest servant of us all. And they would have settled on Jesus because there was nobody serving like Jesus. But they didn't catch it because even after his death, they were still walking away from Jerusalem saying, but we thought he was the one who was going to redeem us. We thought he was going to be the one that's going to ride in on a giant horse as a general and conquer the great empire of Rome. But we were wrong, and they were walking away. And I think one of the greatest examples of his servanthood was he left us one of the most humbling acts that he could have done, and the most humbling act any of us can do. And that's washing feet. Those stinky, nasty feet that you and I hide in our shoes, right? That nobody wants to take a look at, right? We don't go around showing off our feet to anybody, right? We show off our nails, our hair, right? Our clothes, right? Our faces, we lotion things up, we hide our feet. And Jesus, as one of the last acts of service that he could do and show to his disciples, he brings them into the room. And he, the Son of God, kneels down in front of his disciples, the ones that he's supposed to be teaching. A rabbi was not supposed to do that. The disciples were supposed to serve the rabbi. And yet he kneels down in front of his disciples. And let's just set church politics aside, because I know that some people say it needs to be done every month. Some people say it should never be done. It was just an example. Some people say, like we all as a church agreed, we should do it once a year. Right? We just did it this past Thursday. Let's just set that aside for a second. The Son of God knelt down and washed his disciples' feet. He humbled himself. He was on his knees in front of his disciples, bent over, washing their feet. It's a very humiliating act, one that servants were supposed to do. And Jesus did that to his disciples. And look at what he says afterwards. If we look at John chapter 13, it's a passage that we read just this past Thursday. John chapter 13, starting in verse 13. John 13:13. You call me teacher and Lord, and you are right, for so I am. If then your Lord and teacher have washed your feet, you also ought to wash one another's feet. For I have given you an example that you also should do as I have done. Truly I say to you, a servant is not greater than his master, nor is a messenger greater than the one who sent him. Right? He says, if you call me teacher and Lord, which I am, if I got down on the servant's level, and a servant cannot be greater than your master, if your master got down to the servant's level, then you get down even lower than the master. Does that make sense? Jesus, the Son of God, got down to a servant's level. And if we call Jesus our Lord, then we too need to humble ourselves low enough to bend down and wash each other's feet. I still remember, I saw, this was growing up, I saw one of my friends, a person my age, and we were teenagers at the time, washing another member of our church's feet. And he was crying. And I didn't understand it. And to me, it didn't make any sense. Why are you crying washing someone's feet? And I remember he shared afterwards, he said, I get to do something that Jesus did. I get to also wash a member of his family, a disciple's feet, right? Just like Jesus did. And I get to be down on his level. The King of Kings got down and washed feet, and I get to do the same thing. Now, I don't know if my point was not to change your perspective on feet washing. My point was to show you that Jesus, the master, got down to the servant's level. And he's telling us we got to do the same thing. And so for us, how can we kind of apply that? Let's be willing to get down and do the things that are disgusting. Let's do the things that are gross. Let's do the things that other people avoid. Let's do the things that other people maybe refuse. Right? How many of us have refused to wash feet because it's disgusting. I don't want to touch other people's feet. But on a principle level, on an application level, we've done the same thing in ministry too. Oh, you mean I can't stand on stage? Oh, then I don't want to do it. Oh, you mean I have to take this garbage out? No, I don't do that. Right? Oh, you mean I have to come in extra? Oh, I can't do that. And yet Jesus is the one who serves. He gets down on the servant level. And in the hours and the minutes before his arrest, Jesus was in the Garden of Gethsemane, and he was praying and pleading with the Father, and he was begging, "Hey, God, Father, if there's any other way, let this cup from me." And notice, if we turn back to Luke 22, verse 39, it says there's a very interesting prayer because he's not done being a servant. Because there's still his Father, right? And look at what he says in verse 42. I'll start in verse 41. And he withdrew from them about a stone's throw away, and he knelt down and he prayed, saying, "Father, if you are willing, remove this cup from me. Nevertheless, not my will, but yours be done." Jesus is still in servant mode. I know what I want, my physical flesh wants, but not as my will, but yours be done. Still being obedient, even to the point he knows he is heading to the cross. And now Jesus, one of the things that when we think about the death and resurrection of Christ, a lot of times we think of the death as something that happened to Jesus, right? He was betrayed as if he didn't know. He was arrested in the garden. He was beaten. Things happened to him, right? A cross was put on him. He was forced to carry it. Nails were nailed into him, right? He was put on that cross. He was pierced, right? All those things happened to Jesus. But one of the interesting things is that in John 10, verse 18, if we look at John 10, verse 18, this was something that Jesus did intentionally. Jesus knew every single thing that was going to happen to him, and he let it happen nonetheless. Look at what it says. This is Jesus speaking, John 10, verse 18. "No one takes my life from me, but I lay it down of my own accord. I have authority to lay it down, and I have authority to take it up. This is the charge that I have received from my Father. My Father told me, I get to decide if I lay it down or not. I get to decide how that happens. A lot of times we kind of distance Jesus as if Jesus stopped being in control of his own destiny at that point. It never happened. Jesus fully understood what was going to happen, and he allowed it to happen so that you and I didn't have to do that. And I love that. Sometimes I distance myself and say, oh man, all these terrible things happened to Jesus. How could he have let that happen? No, he let that happen. He allowed that to happen. All of those things, that whole string of events happened because you and I, that's what it took to rescue you and I. And so as I conclude this message, what can we do? What can we do? So first of all, what you and I can do is first, we have to serve God faithfully. And I'll read one passage. I've been reading a lot from the New Testament. Let me read a passage from the Old Testament. And this is 1 Samuel chapter 12. 1 Samuel chapter 12. And this is when Samuel my Bible titles this chapter, 1 Samuel chapter 12, as his farewell address to his people. And he says something interesting to the people of Israel. It's 1 Samuel chapter 12, which I think we can apply here for us today. Verse 24, 1 Samuel 12, verse 24. Only fear the Lord and serve him faithfully with your heart, for consider what great things he has done for you. Fear the Lord, serve him with all of your heart, and consider the great things that he has done for you. And I don't think Samuel, he didn't get the privilege of seeing just how great the Father's love is for you, that he would have sent his own son to die for you. And Samuel understood God, I think, in part. And he said, serve God faithfully. Don't forget about the amazing things that he did. You and I have even a greater look into God's love. We have the privilege of seeing just to what extent he allowed his son to be beaten and bruised so that you and I could live in eternity. And we have been given that privilege. The second thing is we need to be able to serve people. We need to be able to serve people. If we look at Philippians chapter 2, verses 14 through 18. Philippians 2, verses 14 through 18. It says, do all things without grumbling or disputing, that you may be blameless and innocent children of God without blemish in the midst of a crooked and twisted generation, among whom you shine as lights of this world. Hold fast to the word of life, so that in that day of Christ I may be proud that I did not run or labor in vain. Even I, Paul is speaking, I am being poured out as a drink offering upon the sacrificial offering of your faith. I am glad and rejoice with you all. Likewise, you also be glad and rejoice with me. Do all things without grumbling or complaining. That's what this passage started off with. We need to be able to serve left and right. Serving God, number one, serving people left and right. I'm going to share just one quick illustration with you guys. I heard a story about just a master of a house, maybe a homeowner, was looking for a jar. And this is obviously not real, but looking for a jar. And he had a bunch of different jars on his wall, and the gold cup started speaking to the master, and he said, you know what, take me. I am gold and I am shiny. I am the most expensive dish that you have. Use me. But the master didn't grab it. The brass jar, the bronze one, said, you know what, use me. Set me in the middle, right? I'm big, I'm expensive, I'm solid, I'm strong. You can use me and you won't be disappointed. But the master didn't grab that one either. Then the crystal jar said, you know what? I'm very fragile. I'm clear. You can see exactly what's in me. I'm very expensive, very delicate. But the master didn't grab that one either. The wooden bowl said, you know what? Yeah, you can use me too, but I'd rather be used for something else. I'm good for like bread and fruit, something along those lines. But the master didn't grab that one either. And instead, the master looked at the clay pot. Clay representing you and I, right? He looked at the clay pot and he said, you know what? I'm going to use this one. I'm going to clean it out. And then he brings the clay pot closer to him and he says these words. He says, there's work that you must do. Just pour out into others what I pour into you. There's work that you must do. Just pour out into others what I pour into you. That is the job that you and I need to do. You want to be a servant? Let God pour himself into you. And whatever he pours into you, the skills, the talents, the time, the effort, the finances. Your job is just pour that into somebody else. That's the job that you and I have been given. Christ poured everything of himself. He emptied himself for you and I. From day one until the last day, he was serving and giving of himself. You and I, if we want to follow his example, we pour ourselves out as well. Let's pray.